I'm gonna try to go find this place in Beverly Hills, second attempt. But that's not why you're watching this YouTube video. Now, I haven't been making those sports videos in the past 2 to 3 weeks. Now we're in November, and the good thing about that is I can finally do a new concept. I can finally do half and half. You know, when we get closer to Thanksgiving, I'll be able to do, half basketball games and then half football games. So this is going to be a football prediction of the Los Angeles Chargers versus the LA Raiders, who in about a year and a half from now will be going to Las Vegas, and they'll be called the Las Vegas Raiders. But that's a completely different video for another time. Now, this is going to be what they call the Battle of LA, which we all know the real Battle of LA is actually the Rams versus one of these teams. The Chargers, they're an okay football team. I mean, they usually make the playoffs, which they do. They win their football games. Now, this is going to be a nice, good, classic throwback to the old school rivalry in the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s, mid 1990s. It's more of a throwback of the 1980s and 90s rivalry than the 70s. But it's going to be a rivalry, and it's going to be very competitive in this football game. It's going to be a battle. You're going to see people get hurt in this football game. You're going to see touchdowns, interceptions. Like the first half, it could be all Chargers. And then the second half is going to be all LA Raiders. Now, you assume that the game is in Raiders town. And you notice if the Raiders are playing at home, they should win this football game simple. Thing is, you're going against a football team that made it to the playoffs 8 out of 10 years. Yeah, because the LA Chargers, they always go to the playoffs. And Raiders have been missing in the playoffs. The last 5 out of 4 seasons, or 6, they haven't been going to the playoffs. And one team has a good record, the other team doesn't have a good record. Or their record's just about the same, and Chargers usually win the last 5-6 games of the season, and then somehow, someway the Chargers are in the playoffs. Why, the Raiders, you never see them in the playoffs. And who wins this football game and why? This one's going to be a tough call, because if it's the Raiders, they got to win by 3 touchdowns. That's the only way I see them beat off the Chargers. You got to at least get 3 touchdowns. Because the Chargers have the ability to play offense, defense. They can play all 4 quarters. And they can make a comeback in the football game. And you see, the Chargers is good at taking wins away from other teams. Like, they have actually done that to the Miami Dolphins, where everybody thought the Dolphins were going to win, and the Chargers went in there and took them out. Same thing against Chicago, and same thing against Denver. They beat teams that they shouldn't even be beating. And I'm talking about the LA Chargers. And then, now, the only thing that can stop the LA Chargers from winning this football game is Philip Rivers, the quarterback. If he's not focused mentally, because they had lost some football games that they should have won. A prime example is that when he threw an interception, I can't remember if it was the Baltimore Ravens, the Cardinals, or the Texans. One of those 3 teams. I can't remember what team it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but he threw an interception, and somebody took the ball, and they ran off for a touchdown. So if he's not focused, that could be what causes them to lose today, and then Raiders will just win. But Raiders need to win by 3 touchdowns, because the score I have in mind is probably going to be 25 to 30. I don't want to say 30 to 35, which I might put down 25 to 29, and if it gets to a high score, 30 to 35. Why I say that? Because I don't see it being no blowout. If it turns into a blowout, it would have to be the Chargers blowing out the Raiders or the Raiders blowing out the Chargers. I don't think you're going to necessarily get a blowout I think you're going to get a close game, and it's going to come down to a touchdown. Either Raiders figure out how to make 3 touchdowns, or the Chargers win the game. Now, the Raiders have won games at home, and they've lost games at home, and you're on television. So this makes it worth watching. Now, if the Raiders can win this, then they might go against the Rams. Now, that's actually a better matchup, because you want to talk about the Battle of LA, that's the Battle of LA. The Rams versus, one of these teams. The Chargers versus the Raiders, this is an old school rivalry. Going back to the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, this is a rivalry. If you are a Chargers fan, if you're an Oakland Raiders fan, you know what I'm talking about. This is a rivalry. Going back to the 1980s, the 90s, the 2000s, this is a rivalry matchup. There have been times where the Chargers have beaten the Raiders, and there have been times where the Raiders have beaten the Chargers. But the Chargers usually beat up on the Raiders more than the Raiders did. The only time the Raiders were able to really dog out the Chargers were like in those post-2000s. And then Philip Reed came, and then all of a sudden, Philip Rivers came, and all of a sudden, that was it for the Raiders. They couldn't beat up on the Chargers no more. So, that's going to be the final score. And then later this week, we'll make some more Sunday football games. Till then, peace.